If you've got big dreams and bad genes, you are in the right place. These shirts are available at barbellapparel.com, link below.
World's Strongest Man was started in 1977. A distinctly American demonstration of showmanship, it featured the top performers at the intersection of elite athleticism, freakish physiques, and tons of D-ball. Since then, the sport has moved through different eras, evolving every step of the way, and the athletes have evolved too. So after nearly 50 years of World's Strongest Man, who can we call the strongest of the strong? We are going to compare every World's Strongest Man winner, take their best numbers, and decide that today. The best proxies for general strength are static events, and the heart of static strength in strongman is pressing and deadlifting. And that's where we have the most information over all of the athletes who have won the World's Strongest Man. So instead of trying to find a way to compare Bruce Wilhelm's bar bending ability to Magnus Samuelsson's grip strength, we're just going to go off the most relevant tests of strength, which happen to be the deadlift and the overhead press. Deads are more relevant because they're in every single show, and they're also a good predictor of your ability to do strongman-y things. Air humping 500-pound stones, sandbags, whatever this thing is, requires just an absolute ton of back and hip strength, and the deadlift is the most easily accessible, commonly trained, and lowest tech option for testing that. For upper body, some guys have overhead press numbers on record, and others don't, so we're going to default to the bench press if the overhead ability is unclear. Now, this is my completely arbitrary tier system. Since we don't have exact numbers for everyone, it doesn't make sense to try to rank each athlete directly to the others like you would in a contest. So instead, we're just going to ballpark the numbers into pretty broad tiers and assign points to each one. If only a few guys in the history of the sport could do something, it gets a full 5 points. Then we subtract weight and lower points for numbers that are increasingly common, all the way down to a number that is so unacceptably mediocre that it merits the shame of a 0. Doesn't this tier list give too much weight to pressing? Yes, it does. Moving on. This is the list of the 26 winners since 1977, along with the points assigned from which tier they fell in. Let's arrange them for their total and start from the bottom. Ted, at close to 7 feet tall, won at the low of World's Strongest Man that no one remembers in the mid-90s because it just wasn't that fucking interesting. And is anyone surprised this is what happens when Europeans take over and un-Americanize otherwise cool things? Like, consider the first year of the sport with the biggest football players and bodybuilders dressed in colorful singlets. Now look at these bland events with this sad backdrop.
No sprinting into the water, just a gentle jog, and that might be good tactics.
You can't play Kenny Loggins to this shit. Now, there's almost no info on Ted, as this was his only appearance, but we can see that he took bottom in the deadlift at a time when people were not deadlifting a lot, and he also failed to press a 120 kilogram or 264 pound block. So he gets a big goose egg. Now, into the 2000s, Phil Pfister was one of the first prototypical giants of the sport with a long wingspan, and he could just grab, move, and load anything, and it allowed him to beat Marius in 2006 at the height of his dominance. Now, Phil was competitive because he was built super well for the events, but he just never figured out how to deadlift. There's like no deadlift information on record for Jeff other than things like the silver dollar deadlift, which give you like no information. Now we can look at Jeff's placing in the cart deadlift at the World's Strongest Man finals to get an idea of what his capability was. He placed between Ab Walders, who is just under an 800-pound deadlift, and John Paul Sigmarsson, who is just over an 800-pound deadlift. So we can assume that Jeff was somewhere around an 800-pound pull from the floor, with some margin of error. He had a 320 log on one of the god-awful, oversized, awkward logs of the early days, but that press is even low for that event. And he had a 484-pound log bench partial, which again, awkward, but also partial range of motion, not earth-shattering. We can comfortably put him in tier 5 for the deadlift and tier 6 for the press. Samuelsson was a Phil Pfister type, tall, fast, mobile, with decent upper body strength. And he did have some of the strongest arms in the game, so much so that he broke a guy's arm in the arm wrestling competition, which is 100% why they don't hold that event anymore. But the thing is, Magnus couldn't deadlift his way out of a paper bag. The best number we have on record for him is a 728. Now then we have one-time winner Yanni Virtanen with 4 times winner Magnus for Magnussen. These two were similar in strength. They both had about an 800-ish pull and both had mid-tier pressing with log presses in the mid-300s and sub-500-pound bench presses. And those numbers were certainly good for the day, but they would absolutely lead to zeros in today's contests. Now in a group by his own is Jouko Ahola. The Finnish strongman was a mere 275 pounds and was one of the best deadlifters of the era, but he's hampered here by mediocre pressing strength. Jouko was credited with a 325 log and a 485 bench press, somewhat on par with Magnus for Magnussen before him. Although he did have a pretty cool acting career, I recommend checking out Invincible with Tim Roth, where Jouko plays a stage strongman working for a Nazi occultist. That part of his career definitely made him more money than a 500-pound log ever would have. Also at 2 points is John Paul Sigmarsson, 4 times winner who had a famous rivalry with Bill Kazmaier. He was known for being over the top, having a ton of energy and stage presence. He was 6'5" and was also on the lighter end of the scale, weighing under 300 pounds. Like Jouko, John Paul was also known for his deadlift, which exceeded 800 pounds. It was even claimed at one point that he went well into the 900s, but that was from an unknown elevated height, and that claim, along with other claims, are largely without sources. I don't think anybody would be surprised if John Paul, at the height of his career, was actually around an 850 deadlift. He also pressed a 360 log using his notorious rest on the head technique, which has mostly been outlawed from strongman. And I don't really know why. I'm not aware of any cervical injuries, neck discs popping out, people getting paralyzed from this technique. You look at what women in developing nations do with baskets full of bricks that they're taking down to the construction site. I think they're a little too hesitant. If anything in strongman is going to kill you, it's not that, but that's neither here nor there. Both of John Paul's lifts place him comfortably in tier 1, netting him 2 points total. Then we have the British champ Gary Taylor, who won in 1993 with a sub 800 pound deadlift. And the interesting thing here is that Gary actually wasn't that tall. It makes sense for a Magnus Samuelsson or a Phil Pfister to get by, but Gary was right around 6 foot. His bench press was reported to be just a skosh over 500 pounds, and the only real overhead record we have in competition is the behind the neck jerk he did with 462. Now that sounds like a lot, but given that it was a proper jerk, he's going to lose just a ton of weight maneuvering that to the front. To put that in perspective, really good heavyweight Olympic lifters have gotten close to 600 pounds, including one of the guys on this list. So for his efforts, Gary walks away with 3 points. You ever find yourself confused by the complexity of programming? I know I struggled like crazy in my early strongman career. There was just too much advice, and every decision I made felt like a guess. As soon as I hit a snag in any program, I would have no idea what to do, so I would inevitably bail. It took me years of training and coaching to figure out how to predictably increase muscle and strength, both in myself and others. And those lessons took me to my own showings in World's Strongest Man, America's Strongest Man, and the Arnold in the 231-pound weight class. This is why we made BaseStrengthAI, to give clear, direct, and personalized instruction right in the middle of your workout in real time. BaseStrengthAI features 3 programs: Block, 70s Powerlifter, and Bullmastiff, each one inspired by the work ethic and programming of the biggest and strongest bodybuilders, powerlifters, and strongmen throughout history. These templates originated in my book Base Strength, and they can be ran as is, but with BaseStrengthAI, weight and volume are prescribed to you on your specific feedback, and that's personalization that even an online coach can't replicate. This gives you the absolute certainty that every rep is meaningful, that every block of training is getting you closer to your goals. It's my programming, but it's your program. Get the heart of old school training with the intelligence of a coach right in your back pocket. Head now to basestrength.com. Also with 3 points are Sven Karlsson, Jamie Reeves, and Vasil Virastuk. Now Vasil beat Marius in 2004, and despite having just an absolute garbage deadlift, he was an excellent athlete. He was a thrower, and he had a huge log press of 441. But yeah, 750 for a single just doesn't cut it in this field. Then you have Sven Viking Power Karlsson, who was a bit better on the deadlift and a bit worse on the press than Vasil was. Sven touted a 408-pound log press, one of the first men to go over 400 pounds, and he had a deadlift comfortably in the 800-pound range. And his numbers were on par with the 1989 winner and Baby Huey lookalike Jamie Reeves, who succeeded in a 390 log and boasted a 600-pound bench press. Now, standing by himself, dead in the middle of this list, is Mariusz Pudzianowski. I know that's going to blow your mind. The Dominator himself is 13th out of 26 in static strength. It doesn't make any sense. Mariusz was considerably stronger than his predecessors at the time he was competing, and more importantly, he was well-rounded and just stupidly conditioned. But his placing right here on this list is just a testament to how good the next 20 years of competition would become. Mariusz's best deadlift was on the order of 900, and his max overhead wasn't as high as his insane rep endurance might lead you to believe. He would just toy with 260 logs and 310 axle presses, but he would struggle with the 366 Apollon's wheels, which is one of the reasons why he never podiumed at the Arnold. Now this brings us to our finalists. With 5 points, we have the monster Don Reinhout, who won in 1979, the third world's strongest man. At 6'3", he was 365 pounds of swollen pork roast. Don had a 60-inch chest. He had size 15 shoes, extra wide. He was all league in baseball, all Western in football and shot put, and most notably, he had the heaviest powerlifting total in history, which came before the advent of the marathon suits, and it stood for 38 years. It was a 2391 from a 931 squat, 607 bench press, and 885 deadlift, and it stood until it was broken by Andrei Milanichev in 2013. With 6 points, we have Bruce Wilhelm, who won the 2 years before Don. Like Don, Bruce also played many sports. He threw 66 feet as a shot putter at the Olympic trials. He was an AAWU wrestling champ, and he was also a weightlifter. Bruce cleared 462 pounds in the power clean and was the first American to snatch 400 pounds. He jerked 551 from a rack. He behind the neck jerked 573, and he did all this, by the way, while fucking dabbling in Olympic lifting, not practicing it for 70 hours a week in a work camp like the Soviets did. He claimed to have deadlifted 793, benched 562, and Olympic-style squatted 775, really just dicking around. That's a 2155 total from an Oli all-arounder, which is just nuts. So between Don and Bruce running the first 3 years of Strongman and then Kazmaier running the next 3, you can see why I'm a little salty at the Europeans for just destroying 90s Strongman. I mean, they inarguably set the sport back like 20 years. Now also with 6 points from this list is Martins Elisis. Now Martins was introduced to stone lifting by his Latvian grandfather, who was an Olympic lifter in his day. And Martins eventually dove straight into training to get as strong as he possibly could to avoid getting bullied, which is probably the most relatable thing on this list. Martins pulled a raw 970-pound deadlift on the elephant bar, and he log pressed a 441. Now, he's known for being mobile and very well versed in a lot of different skills. He does mass wrestling, which Ode Haugen from the training hall pushes. He pursues odd lifts. He did a reported world record in the Steinborn squat with a 565. All things that you would not expect from somebody at his size and his strength level. Now, sharing the three-way tie with 6 points is Alexei Novikov. Alexei works as part of the Kiev Police Special Forces unit in Ukraine, and he has since been actually drafted into the Ukrainian war. When Alexei Novikov won the World's Strongest Man in 2020, he was only 7 days older than the youngest to ever win it, which was John Paul Sigmarsson at 24 years old. Now, in addition to his sweet chin strap, Alexei also boasts a 1,000-pound deadlift, which he pulled at the Deadlift World Championships, and has the Hummer tire record at 12:10. He's log pressed 400 for 4, he Flintstone behind the neck pressed 542, and handled a 276 circus dumbbell, one of the looniest things I've ever seen, for 7 consecutive reps. And Alexei does this usually weighing in under 300 pounds. At 7 points, we have Tom Stoltman. Tom's a Scottish strongman, part of the Stoltman brothers duo with his brother Luke, but we don't talk about Luke anymore. Tom's known as the Albatross for his massive wingspan. Now, unsurprisingly, this large wingspan makes him a devastating stone loader, as he has the record with 631 pounds. But like his brother Luke, we don't talk about that either. He set this stone load record in the same federation, the WUS Core Sports team up, that hosted Thor's 501 kilogram deadlift, which is how we were getting strongman contests during COVID, if any of you remember, when the world was shut down. And we thought it was really cool back then. But then the internet decided that no, it doesn't count, it's not a real contest. So out of consistency, I guess when somebody asks what the heaviest stone ever lifted is, we definitely can't say Tom Stoltman's freakish 631 that was judged by Zydrunas Savickas. We have to call it a home gym lift and say that his dad probably weighed the weights. That's just a joke. Of course it counts, you losers. Tell Eddie Hall to cry about it. Now, Tom pulled 948 pounds and did an 885 for 5, both extremely impressive deadlifts, but his pressing is really next level. He pressed a 463 log and axle, and he did a disgusting 359 for 10 on the log in 90 seconds. That's higher than Magnus Magnussen's 1 rep max. For 10, you see how we're getting into a different era here. And even so, Tom's max log doesn't even make the top tier. Sharing 7 points with Tom is the legend himself, Bill Kazmaier. Now, everybody knows of Kaz's feats thanks to his pathological self-promotion. Now, love him or hate him, Kaz was actually about as strong as his ego thought he was, and that's saying something. He actually did beat Don Rideout's powerlifting record, but he did it using a marathon suit. It's like a first-generation single ply. Even though it didn't give quite as much as single ply does today, it certainly gave more than nothing, and we categorize it differently. But even so, his 925 squat and 886 deads in powerlifting are still monumental. And his 661 bench was done stone cold raw. He did a 370 log, which was the record for a time, on the oversized, unbalanced monstrosity that had to be Steinborned into position today, and that setup would probably drop the world record by 70 pounds or so. Now, maybe Kaz squatted 800 for 10, like he claimed. Maybe he didn't. But he was just stupidly stronger than everyone in the field and carried on the tradition set by Don Reinhardt and Bruce Wilhelm before him. Moving on with 8 points, we have the GOAT, the legend himself, Big Z, Zydrunas Savickas, Lithuanian giant. Z, his legendary status came from upsetting Marius's place as the new Mach 2 prototypical strongman. Marius was it. We'd reached the pinnacle, and then Zydrunas came in, just gained an immense amount of weight, and started moving loads that nobody thought possible. And given how he was doing his best impersonation of the Stay Puffed Man, he could also move. People always expected him to be bad at moving events, and he just never was. Z was dominant. And I don't mean good. He was untouchable in an era where the weights were jumping every year and world records were falling left and right, and he had his hand in making many of them fall. He had a disgusting 8 wins at the heaviest show on earth, the Arnold Strongman Classic, where Pujanowski never managed to podium. Z ended up hitting a log press record of 503, which was only chipped recently by a few pounds by Iron Bibby. And that leaves him as one of exactly 2 people to ever clear 500 on a log. And with a Hummer tire deadlift of 1155 and a 959 raw pull from the floor, he spent most of his career unchallenged on deadlift events. Now, sharing the spot with 8 points, we're getting into the most recent modern strongman dynasties. Brian Shaw, Colorado-born college basketball player. Shaw was the first fully realized iteration of the modern strongman giant. At 6'8" or so and pushing 200 kilos, 430 pounds or so, he had the height and athleticism of John Paul Sigmarsson, Magnus Samuelsson, Ted Vanderpar, Phil Pfister. But this was different. He was heavy enough. He packed on the weight and muscle necessary to fill out his frame and carry the strength of the other strong competitors. Brian Shaw came into his own when Zydrunas Savickas was already on his tear but getting ready to wind down. But they had some monster clashes when they were both close to their prime. Brian pulled a raw 1021 elephant bar deadlift and doubled a 441 log at the Arnold Classic. He also has one of the strongest pairs of hands in just the entire history of the sport. Now these top 3 are tied with 9 points. We're going to go through each one by one and then decide who wins the beauty pageant. Eddie Hall. Now, Eddie is known for his boxing and Speedo antics on YouTube, along with trolling the shit out of Brian Shaw. Eddie had a lifetime goal to win World's Strongest Man, and that's when I became a fan of him. Like, hats off. He did what he had to do, focused on that singular goal, ate himself to 440 pounds, half a foot shorter than Brian Shaw and Thor in order to get as strong as he needed. And when he got that title, he bounced. And I mean, look at him. Look at this beautiful specimen of human achievement. That's not bad CGI of an orc, folks. That is Edward Hall in his prime. Now, in the process of getting his World's Strongest Man title, he became the first man to deadlift 500 kilograms, or 1102, and he also narrowly, and I mean narrowly, missed a 507 log that would have taken Zydrunas' record. While you can't really count it, it is a very strong signal as to how strong his press actually was. He got credit for a 470 log, and he also did a whole bunch of shit in the gym that, again, demonstrates his upper body strength. He benched 585 for 6. Most of his best performances were strict pressed, and he didn't just hang, he won. We can also start talking about squatting ability to get more information about these gentlemen. Anytime there was a squat event at World's Strongest Man, he would just outright dominate it. And in training, he did a 760 for 8 reps without a freaking belt. And he also claimed an 890, also completely raw, as his best. Then came Thor Bjornsson, the Icelandic strongman who will beat out heart disease for the #1 reason that Eddie Hall dies young. The Mountain from Game of Thrones is the tallest competitor in the modern field, weighing as much as Shaw, but leaner, and in my opinion, he could have taken on the title of GOAT if he didn't drop 150 pounds to go box Eddie Hall. Now, recently he suffered a major pec tear that's hampering his pressing ability recently on this comeback, but beforehand he had pressed a 470 log with Eddie and tripled a 430 log in contest. He also strict pressed a 440. Thor has a raw with wrap 2,400 pound powerlifting total, and included in that is a legit 1,000 pound raw with wraps contest squat. It's also worth noting that Thor podiumed at World's Strongest Man every year for 8 years in a row and has won the Arnold 3 times. And remember when I said he's going to be the reason that Eddie Hall dies young? It's because of his most famous feat, which is chipping Eddie Hall's unbreakable world record by exactly 1 kilogram. Thor is currently the best deadlifter to have ever lived. And rounding out the tie for first place, we have Mitchell Hooper, the Canadian Moose, who is another leap forward for the sport, where so many people had to grind for years to get their status at the top. I mean, we watched Brian Shaw, we watched Eddie Hall, we watched Thor. Mitch went from running marathons and looking like a twig to saying, I think I'll try strongman now. And from that point to his first World's Strongest Man win was something like 24 hours. Now, Mitch has deadlifted a 1047. And that's just a demonstration of brute strength, but he's also used his athletic adaptability. He started practicing the jerk, and unlike so many people, he actually made good use of it and used it to set the current axle record at 481. And in addition to that, he's fast. He can move with anything. He's good at just about everything. He doesn't really have a weakness. And at 6'3", he's not excessively tall. At 325 pounds, he's not excessively big. And with body fat in the mid-high 20s, he's not excessively lean. So where the hell does his strength even come from? Because it's not sheer muscle mass. Mitch is the anti-underdog. He's more talented than anybody who ever came before him and was able to make this monumental run coming from behind at just an absolutely astonishing pace. That's not to knock his work ethic or somehow cheapen his accomplishments, but Mitch is who he is, and he's a testament to how important extreme genetic selection is when you really want to find who the best of the best of the best is. So here's the question between the top 3, who takes it? For the deadlift, we're looking at the full kit and caboodle. Everybody's wrapped up in a suit and straps like a gun safe on Christmas. They're pulling on spaghetti noodle bars, using whatever the hell they can to keep their hands glued to the bar. Eddie and Thor are neck and neck here. Both of them surpassed 500 kilograms at around the same body weight, and nobody has touched that since. I'm guessing they're not going to anytime soon. What strikes me is Thor's reps always looked a lot easier, and he has the record by a kilogram anyways, so it just makes sense to go with that. Now, Mitch's 1047 still puts him at the tippity top of strongman deadlifters, and he did it weighing more than 100 pounds less than both of them, which is like just fucking bananas. But I didn't put who has the highest dot score in the title. We're going by numbers, and right now Thor is at the top, Eddie Hall in the middle, and Mitch at the bottom. Now the press is a little trickier. We can look at their axle presses. Thor has a 454, Mitch has the record at 481, though it was split jerked, and Mitch took that record from Eddie Hall, who did 476. But Eddie Hall strict pressed it. Again, we're looking at a 5-pound difference, but the way that the presses were done, we're talking about strength. We're only using the number as a raw estimator of strength. There is no possible way I can give Mitch the edge here. Eddie Hall strict pressed 476. I mean, even though it was a failed lift, how many people could get this close with a 507 log? I only think Bibby and Z could have. Again, just look at the strict presses. Mitch has a very impressive 386 pound strict pressed here, but Thor did goddamn 200 kilos. He did a 440. Again, body weight makes it an interesting discussion, but guys, that's not what we're here for. Now, lastly, let's talk about the squat. And I'm adding it in here because this was unreliable for a lot of the people that competed. In fact, most of the guys I probably couldn't find squat numbers, but here it's very relevant. Strongman is more heavy on the lower body than upper body anyway, so this is going to round that out a bit. And we have very good reliable information on these three. Now, Eddie Hall put up some huge squats, and he did most of them without a belt or wraps, so it makes it really hard to compare. In training, he did a 760 for 8, and they all looked to be at good contest depth. He claimed that he did a 405 kilogram or about an 890 in this style, which again, going without a belt is insane. Now, Thor has a legit raw with wraps 1,000-pound squat in contest. Now, I don't think Peak Eddie Hall gets 100 pounds out of a belt and wraps, so I'm going to give the edge here to Thor. Now, Mitch's wrapped 865. I mean, that's top tier. Most strongmen treat squatting as an afterthought, and they don't really put up the impressive numbers you see until they start cramming themselves into briefs and triple ply squat suits. So the final tally for squat, pressing, and deadlift, we have Thor at the top with 8 points. In this 3-man contest, you got Eddie Hall with 7 and Mitch Hooper down with 2. Now, don't interpret this like Mitch Hooper is weak. This is just how he relates to 2 of literally the statically strongest men to have ever competed in the sport of strongman. These are men that weigh substantially more than him, and Mitch doesn't need to eat himself to death in order to put up the numbers he's putting up, which are still extremely close to the numbers that these guys were doing. But my number one winner, my gold medalist, my pick for the strongest World's Strongest Man winner in the history of the World's Strongest Man, it is the man himself, Hafthor Julius Bjornsson. I mean, an 1105 deadlift with a 440 strict press and a 1,000-pound wrap squat. So I can't wait to see in the comments how you guys would have put this together, the things you hated, because every time you rank something this complex, people are going to hate something. And you know, I'm going to go through and I'm just going to read every single one. So let me know what you guys think. Leave it in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.